Hello, my name is Carol Carter, and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We are dedicated to creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented populations into the education, employment, and economic mobility pipeline. And we do that in a number of ways, one of which is an annual conference that last year was virtual and this year is also virtual. But next year will be in person back in Denver in 2022, the third week of June. So we look forward to you joining us in person for that. We also serve first generation to college students, and we do a leadership program for them that will be taking place virtually week after next. So if you work with first gen students, you can go online and get them signed up for that. Because it's virtual, we don't have to limit attendance in some of the ways we do when people come to Denver. So that's one of the second big things we do. The third thing is we have monthly equity events, and there is one for STEM, there's one for technology, there's one for the health professions, K-12, higher education, and foundations and funders, where diverse leaders lead these panels, and they have diverse panelists tackling the most critical topics that we face. So those are communities of practice. You can join those every month ongoing. So it's a pleasure to have you all here. And I want to introduce part of our last day of this incredible week featuring STEM stars with the National Science Foundation Includes Network and all of our different partners. I want to share a little bit about Dr. Kemi Ladeji-Osias, and she is going to launch this remarkable day to end this week. Dr. Kemi Ladeji-Osias is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where she has served as a faculty member and associate dean for undergraduate studies. She holds a BS in electrical engineering from University of Maryland, College Park, and a PhD in biomedical engineering from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. She teaches courses in computer and biomedical engineering, and she has led several projects funded by the National Science Foundation and the Verizon Foundation focused on engineering education. She serves on the advisory committee for Middle Atlantic section of the American Society of Engineering Education and as an ABET program evaluator for the Engineering Accreditation Commission, EAC, representing IEEE. You tell the liberal arts major can say that. So thank you so much. And Dr. Ladeji-Osias, so great to welcome you, and looking forward to another incredible day of this week.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome everyone to today's keynote presentation titled Ubuntu, a non-Western perspective on how collective impact can broaden participation in STEM. As Carol said, I'm Kemi Ladeji-Osias, and I'm particularly interested in this conversation because I have a Nigerian and an American parent, so this ties together both of my cultural backgrounds. First, let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Ivory Toldson is the president and CEO of the QEM Network, a professor of counseling psychology at Howard University, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education, and executive director of the Journal for Policy Analysis and Research, published by the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Dr. Toldson also was previously appointed by President Barack Obama to devise national strategies to sustain and expand federal support to HBCUs as the executive director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Since 2016, as QEM principal investigator, Dr. Toldson has been awarded more than $4.5 million from federal agencies, including the National Science Foundation and NASA, to support capacity building efforts for STEM programs at minority serving institutions. Welcome, Dr. Toldson.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to start off with a question, and then you can lead us into your presentation if necessary.
Okay.
So let's start with the basics. What do you mean by Ubuntu, and how do you define collective impact? And can you also define broadening participation?
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for inviting me to be a keynote speaker and for allowing me to speak on this topic. This is my first time giving a presentation on this topic, but it's something that I've thought about quite a bit in my role as a co-PI on the NSF Includes Coordination Hub. And I'm delighted to see our new PI for that project, Andrea Venenzia, who just took on that role a couple of weeks ago, but I've had a chance to talk to her, and I'm excited about what we can do over the next couple of years. I should also say that I am presenting from Indonesia, Bali. My little brother gets married tomorrow morning, or tomorrow afternoon, and I am the best man, so I'm excited about that too. So I want to start off by giving you all an anecdote. And this is actually a Facebook post that I posted several years ago. This post got about 250 likes. Yes, my self-esteem is intimately tied into how many likes I get on Facebook. So this is what I posted. I said, my first year teaching at Howard University, I had two students who turned in the same assignment. The audacity, I thought. I called them into my office to reveal what I discovered. They both seemed confused. They explained that they worked on the assignment together. I told them that it doesn't work that way and gave them a chance to revise. They obliged and continued to work independently throughout the semester. A decade later, reflecting on them, I consider their international student status. They were both from countries in Africa and probably had a collectivist orientation. To them, it made perfect sense to work together towards a common goal and submit a paper in unison. To me, it was wrong. But looking back now, I can't honestly answer the question, what made it wrong? All right, so I share that just to kind of get us to thinking about how we think about things in Western culture without really questioning it. So doing your work independently is a value that we have. And it's something that is reflected in how we construct our education system and how we award merit professionally. But when we think about people doing things together, why is it wrong for people to do something together and get mutual credit and rise and fall together? So when I think about the collective impact structure that's been introduced as a major component of the NSF Includes initiative, I think about it in terms of NSF moving in the right direction towards that understanding that is not inherently wrong to do things together. In fact, there's a benefit to that you can strengthen the work by doing it. What I've observed over the last few years, though, is that there may be some disconnect from the original values that made collective impact meaningful in the first place. And that's the collectivism that we can see in many non-Western cultures, including indigenous cultures, African cultures, Asian cultures. So I want to talk a little bit about what collectivism looks like in the Black community. And I also want to talk about how it can inform how we view collective impact through initiatives like Includes. So I grew up with a stepfather who was a Black nationalist who led a organization called the Republic of New Africa. And one of the things that I remember vividly about him is that when he wrote, he always had his I's as lowercase and his we's as uppercase. So we are taught to always capitalize the I in English language. He capitalized the we instead. That is, to me, that's kind of the essence of what Ubuntu is. It literally means I am because we are, with a lowercase I, capitalizing we. Um, Many of us are familiar with Kwanzaa. There's also a principle in Kwanzaa, Ujima. Ujima is translated to collective worker responsibility. And Karenga, who's a father of Kwanzaa, he wrote back in the 60s to build and maintain our communities together, to make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems so that we solve them together. To make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems so that we solve them together. So let's think about that in terms of broadening participation. Broadening participation is really about solving the problems of someone who, it might be yourself, it may be someone else, but it really doesn't matter because you're making those problems your own. So when we think about someone who is in a school that's not giving them the types of tools that they need to be competitive in college, that's not their problem, it's our problem. And so collective impact, when we look at it in terms of collectivism, we don't see ourselves as fixing somebody else's problem. We genuinely see it as fixing our own problems. What collective impact is based on 5 major tenets: a common agenda, shared measurement systems, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone support. So I want to talk about what collectivism would look like. And many of these tenets could be informed, it could be developed further, but I think understanding some of the tenets of collectivism within the context of how we view collective impact can help us to maybe accelerate what we're trying to do with programs like NSF Includes. So one of the tenets of collective impact are collectivism, and I've already talked about this a little bit before, but it's true interdependence. So again, my brothers and sisters' problems are my problems. Some of you all, if you grew up in certain homes, you may have had that kind of parent that said, if one child makes a mistake or one child does something bad, everybody gets in trouble. Some of you all had that, or at least you have heard of it. Many of you all have heard the concept it takes a village to raise a child. I am my brother's keeper. All of these are things that that's quite natural to a lot of in a lot of Black communities and a lot of Black families. When we think about programs like NSF Includes that use a collective impact framework, we don't have true interdependence because a project can be successful without other projects reaching their goals. So it's a idea that we have, it's a vision that we would like to do in theory, but in practice, many of the individual projects within a lot of collective impact frameworks, they can be successful without other projects also being successful. And this could diminish the way that each project looks at their relationship to the other projects. So when I think about my own success, I'm thinking about reaching my own independent objectives. I'm thinking about how many publications I get out of it, but I'm not really thinking about my success depending upon the success of someone else. Another tenet that's within collectivism is fictive kin. So I've already said brothers and sisters, and many of you all know how Black people like to call each other brother sister. A lot of times we have fake aunties, we have fake uncles, we might call people cousin. So all of these are things that was started in the Black community. It has been, much of it has been appropriated. So a lot of times we'll see hipsters going around saying, bruh, bruh, bruh. But we all know that that came from Black people using brother and sister back during the civil rights era to create the kind of harmony that they needed in order to survive, in order to meet a challenge or a struggle. When we think about programs like NSF Includes, and think about what we're really trying to do, um, what we want to do is really God's work. It's work that would require us to have a deeper bond with each other, because it is a issue or a problem that is so vast that you have to work with people that you trust, people that you can rely on, people that understand you in a way that is deeper than just a pure professional relationship. Um, Many of us at HBCUs, we understand, the pros and cons of the fictive kin mentality. Sometimes you just don't get anything done in certain circumstances if you don't know that administrative assistant personally. If you don't actually go there, take the time to walk to the office and comment on the pictures that you see on their desk. Um, that is a part of HBCU culture. For the good and the bad, that's how it works at a lot of HBCUs, and a lot of HBCU researchers, PIs who are successful. They're successful because they have gotten to know a lot of people on their campus in this way. Another tenet of collectivism is hierarchy based on wisdom from lived experiences. This is much different than the Western view of hierarchy, where you get a higher level of status because of certain markers of merit and affluence. So in academia, for instance, you get a higher status if you have more titles, if you have more degrees, if you have more publications. But in a collectivist environment, those things don't matter as much as the experiences that you have. A lot of times we see this in HBCU culture too, where you won't have, some young person coming in just because they have a PhD, or just because they just got a PhD from this very well-regarded institution. They're not going to come in and just tell this older woman what to do because they have this title. They have to respect her experience, her wisdom, how long she's been there. So when we think about, and I remember working under a project for Dr. Ronald Braithwaite. He was at Morehouse School of Medicine. And one thing that I really liked about him is that when he put things together, and we were doing research on the prison population and on drug addictions, he would bring people to talk to us who had experience being an inmate. And so we got a chance to actually talk to people from the prison system, not who worked at the prison system, those who had been incarcerated. So that experience work. So when we think about projects like NSF Includes, when we think about a collective impact model, if we think about it in terms of collectivism, we would have more reverence for any person within that ecosystem that is closer to what we're trying to fix and has the type of experience, that lived experience, where we can draw some wisdom from. So it wouldn't be, this PI has this many publications and they have this many titles and they went to this school, this PI is a PI of an alliance and this PI is a PI of a DDLP or eager. That's not how the hierarchy would work. The hierarchy would come from the experience, and it would be this leveling of the order, and that also helps to create the type of true interdependence that we need in order to really work together. So that's how I want to respond to your first question, just to give the full depth and breadth of how I think that Ubuntu connects to broadening participation.
So this has been very enlightening. On day one, Dr. Cheryl Talley from Virginia State encouraged us to include a social science theory to ground the work that is done within broadening participation to enable further scaling of anything that we are able to achieve. Could you put Ubuntu in the context of social science theory, please?
Yeah. So I think that was very important advice that Dr. Taylor gave. When we think about, so there's a concept that I wrote about in my book, No BS, Bad Stats, called Numbers Are People. And I talked about myself as a child. As I was trying to learn mathematics, I was distracted from this peculiarity that I had with converting all of my numbers to people. And so I assigned all of the numbers, as I was in elementary school learning mathematics, I assigned personality, characteristics, and genders to all of the numbers. And I would make up stories about the kind of relationship the numbers had with each other. So number 1 was the daughter of number 8. And number 8 was a man who was married to 9, who was a woman. So that was the kind of stories that I would create as a child. Now, as I got older, I had to overcome that in order to learn mathematics the way that I was supposed to be learning mathematics within my school environment. But as I got older, I realized that I was actually right, because numbers are people. And when you disconnect numbers from people, you tend to use numbers in a way that oppresses. So for instance, if we are saying that we're looking at a incarceration rate, we can say that the incarceration rate is higher among Black people. And you can, either talk bad about Black people or talk bad about the criminal justice system. But when you connect it to the people, when you actually see a Black person who has been incarcerated and talk to that Black person who's been incarcerated, then it becomes more you get the context and the nuance that you need. In ancient Egypt, that's actually how they learn mathematics. Like they learn mathematics through the relationships that numbers had with each other, not looking at discrete concepts. So social science is about understanding people and the impact that it has. When we think about engineering, you can think about engineering in terms of profit that you can make or a company could make. Or you could think about engineering in terms of the positive things that it does for the lives of other people. And in a lot of research on looking at underrepresented students in STEM, a lot of underrepresented students, especially if they've come from a tough background, they want to go into STEM in order to help to make the world a better place. They have seen certain things in their community, whether it be things related to access to power. It could be things related to chemical plants that was close to certain neighborhoods, access to healthcare, all of these different things. And they want to learn how to make things better. And sometimes when we're trying to promote STEM and we lose that, we disconnect STEM from the power of STEM to help people. And all we're doing is drilling concepts that we're trying to get people to memorize, but disconnecting it from the social good, then I think we lose a lot of the students who we want to um, broaden the opportunities to. So I think, those are some of the ways in which this concept is related to what Dr. Taylor was saying.
Perfect. Thank you. So earlier you outlined for us some of the tenets of collectivism. And so I want you to give us a practical example. So in looking at the data, Black women are one of the most underrepresented groups in engineering, especially when you compare it to our percentage of the US population. How
Mhm.
can this Ubuntu concept be used or applied to solve the problem in engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I remember seeing the phenomenon. I reviewed a proposal from a team that was comprised of FAMU, Florida A&M University, HBCU, in Tallahassee, Florida, and Florida State University, which is a large, predominantly white institution in the same city. And it was about increasing the participation of Black women in STEM. And it was very, just unapologetically Black. They talked about sister circles. They spell sister with a A at the end, not the ER, not sister, sister. And much of what they talked about in that proposal was about the power of mentoring, but it was mentoring that went beyond the way that we think about mentoring in this way, where you just have one person who has more experience than another person that's guiding them. It was more about the mentorship that created the kind of sister relationship that I described earlier. So that fictive kin, so it's one thing to say, I'm going to mentor this person, but it's quite something else to say that I'm going to be a brother or a sister. I'm going to create the kind of bond with this person that's going to uplift them. And when it comes to Black women, because of so many barriers that Black women have in society, having that confluence of racism and sexism, and having systems that are built to undermine the capabilities of women and create barriers for Black people at the same time, and having to go through that. You need something deeper than what you would typically get from a traditional university setting. So that fictive kin would be something that would help and enhance that. Um, Also, the true interdependence, um, creating the kind of social structure within the environment where there's this reliance on other people. It's not about you come in on your own, you do things on your own, but it's about creating a community, a community within a community. And also I talked about those hierarchies. Um, when we bring people into a university setting, and we are saying you have the president here, and you have administrators here, and you have faculty members here, and then you have students at the bottom. Um, that doesn't really play well with a lot of the ways in which Black people have grown up. You're not going to tell us that this president is more important socially or otherwise, socially, professionally or otherwise, than uh, our own parents who who oftentimes don't have those same degrees, but we know that they have these experiences that make them valuable. So it's about bringing in the entire university community to create the kind of system that's going to support Black women, so that um, the community supports them in a way that's a lot deeper than what you'd have in this traditional university setting.
So thank you for that response, and it jives quite well with some of what we heard from our employers yesterday, our industry panel, and how they were coping with being women in the workforce and in graduate school. Prior to this workshop, we had some students who had met to sort of provide input and guide some of what we do, and that also aligns quite well with the concept of Ubuntu and gathering information from those who are close to the problems with which we're trying to solve. One of the questions that they had for you is, how have the challenges that you have faced in pursuit of your education impacted you personally? And what advice can you give to them as they go through their education?
Yeah. Well, I came up a non-traditional learner, and that was always difficult. Um, so I had a lot of characteristics of someone who had ADHD. I had a difficult time reading, uh, especially reading in a way that I had been taught. So reading line by line, page by page. Um, I would get bored very easily and constantly needed to stimulate myself. And I probably got through school mostly on relationship building, and being someone who thought outside the box, and who um, teachers liked enough to pass, but I didn't necessarily do good work. So my biggest challenge was trying to figure out how to create the kind of learning environment for myself, where I would thrive in when the traditional learning environment wasn't necessarily conducive to me working in a way that felt natural to me. Um, so one of the pieces of advice I would give is that you have to define yourself for yourself. You have to understand that there are ways in which we have been taught to think about who is a smart and capable person. And sometimes, or oftentimes, those definitions may not fit into who we are, but those definitions also don't necessarily create the kind of innovation in the future that the industry needs. So if someone has a higher GPA than you, or if someone has a higher SAT or GRE score than you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are better, or they're in a position to do better in the future than you. So you really have to understand yourself well, and you have to not be defined by standards that may not relate to you. And you have to um, understand the big picture of what you want to do and what you want to achieve, and not be burdened by standards that may not mean anything for you personally about what you're capable of. So those are some of the things that I would advise.
Thank you, and that's very good advice for students. The other question students had for you is, under President Biden's administration, what would you like to see implemented next?
Yeah, a lot of the proposals that President Biden has come out with, I think it would do some great things. I think it's about maybe about a 500 billion or something like that. Like, it's a lot of money that he's proposing in order to enhance STEM education at minority serving institutions. There's funding in there to create a pathway for the first 2 years of college for all minority serving institution students to be free. So all of those things, both of those things are things I hope we see. As someone who was who was a part of an administration as the executive director of the White House Issue on HBCUs, I know that the president can't do any of that by him or herself. And I know that in order for something like that to happen, there would need to be a bill drafted through Congress, and they would need to pass both houses, and it would have to reach the president's desk for a signature. So it would be a heavy lift, but the easiest way for that to happen is for as many people to know about it as possible, and for us to talk about it in meetings like this, to blog about it, to have conversations with people who are policymakers. Because if we're going to really create the kind of changes that we need resources to be spent appropriately, wisely. And I think those proposals for higher education, they are they would do the things that would be very important for our country. I also worked on President Biden's campaign. I was one of the education policy leads. So a lot of those policies that we're seeing coming out now were things that were drafted while he was running for president. So I'm happy that he won, and I'm happy that that a lot of those policies, especially the ones that pertain to minority serving institutions, are he's mentioning them. We have those first steps towards making it a reality. But again, we have a whole lot of work to do collectively in order to make it a reality.
Great, thank you. So of course, and we also invite audience questions. And we have a question from Dr. Anthony Kinwa, one of my colleagues at Morgan State University. And his question is that Ubuntu has shaped the destiny of many people. How can we recover this tenet in our societies now that people are becoming very individualistic and our students are no longer keen to work on group projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say that we aren't becoming individualistic. Individualism is a Western value that's been around for centuries. And it's a value that is based on putting individual needs before the whole. It's a value that can create the kind of oppressive environments where people who are seen as weak are taken advantage of. And so, I would say that we actually have opportunities to reshape that now that we may not have had in the past. I don't think we're necessarily going in the wrong direction. We're going in the right direction fast enough. I also think that it's important for people of color to claim stake in how things are, how things move and how things are positioned. So there's all of us are familiar with, appropriations of other cultures, Black culture in particular. And when we think about things like collective impact, NSF has been talking about collective impact for a while now. Maybe close to 10 years. NSF Includes was conceived around 2013, and typically the major publication that informs collective impact comes from Stanford. It was an article that was written on a Stanford publication. That's the article that I see cited the most frequently. So, it's important for us to make sure that collectivism isn't lost on the notion of collective impact. Because, as I said earlier, collective impact seems to be missing something because it doesn't seem to tie in as well to collectivism as it should. And some of the ways in which it could truly tie to collectivism, I'm willing to concede that we may not be ready for it. NSF may not be ready to actually ding a project because another project hasn't lived up to it. But where is that middle ground? If we say that we're working together, where's the middle ground between your project fails if the other project doesn't succeed? Or you're doing things completely independent of each other? I don't think we really found the middle ground. I think that we're closer to true independence and individuality, even within that ecosystem, than we are to any semblance of collectivism. And I also think that is missing the struggle. The projects that are within NSF Includes, they're all built around helping others, but the ownership of what you're helping, I don't think is there as strong as it needs to be. And so in order for us, you talked about, being selfish. In order for us not to be selfish, we have to take ownership of other people's burdens. That whole notion of, he ain't heavy, he's my brother. A lot of you all remember, that was a meme before memes even existed. But we really have to be able to think in that way in order to reduce that selfishness. And another thing I'll say is that a lot of the structures within the university, it creates the kind of individualistic competition that we don't want. We have, how do we assign grades? We typically assign grades based on work that students do by themselves. How do we treat students who have better grades than students who don't have good grades? And we typically don't look at the circumstance. If the student that has good grades came in with a scholarship, they came in from one of what's considered the best high schools in their cities, they came from an affluent home, they've never had to work while they were in school because they had everything paid for. But someone with grades that are good enough was scrapping and saving and went through all kinds of burdens just to get the grades that they have. We still just look at those numbers. We separate those numbers from people. We look at that number and we treat certain students better than other students just because of a number that's associated with them. And so we have to think about what we're doing within our university environments that's creating the kind of individualistic, selfish behaviors that we say we don't like.
Thank you. That's really food for thought. Another audience member question: do we need to reach out beyond the academic community to fully support Black students in engineering and STEM? They're thinking in particular about families and communities they care about and they want to give back to.
Yeah, I would say we always need to reach out beyond, what we, the proverbial ivory tower. Um, if we think about what we really want to do, what we're really trying to create, we, bottom line is we can't just do the things that we've been taught and think that it's going to make a difference for the communities that we care the most about. A lot of times the academic environment can be this bubble, and we care about certain things that isn't going to make any kind of impact on the communities. Let's take things like peer review publications in top tier journals. You can get a peer review publication in a top tier journal, but not create anything that's going to actually help people who are the most vulnerable. And so there's a lot of things that we chase in academia that just won't help us to create, to make the kind of changes that we want to make. So yes, I would say, we have to think broader. We have to think outside of the academic community. I want to mention Dr. Braithwaite again, because him structuring a program, a study for a group of young scholars during the time when I came through his program, that wasn't based on him just bringing in people who published a lot, but bringing in people who had lived experiences. He's published a lot. He's gotten a lot of grants. He's done all of those things. He could have easily just reached out to his network and found a whole bunch of other Dr. Braithwaites for us to talk to, but he didn't do that. He knew that we had easier access to other Dr. Braithwaites than we had access to people who was formerly incarcerated. And so I think doing more of that could help us to create more compassionate systems within academia.
Thank you. For many of us, between the unrest due to George Floyd's murder and the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has changed. Where do we go from here, and how can Ubuntu help us move forward?
Okay. Well, it's first important to know that the world is always changing. The world never stands still. The most important thing to do is to learn from the past and prepare for the future. So that's it. Things have happened that we have a whole lot of lessons to learn from. And that's really boils down to what lesson did you learn? With George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's murder, all those things that happened, did you come away from it just feeling bad? Or did you come away from it learning something? And what's your ability to connect these recent incidents to incidents of the past? What kind of patterns can you make? Because Black people didn't just start getting killed. Mm-hmm. Black people have been getting killed since we got to this country. And so what connections are we making? What are we learning? And then when we look into the future, I believe that the things that our ancestors did to end slavery, and when I think about slavery ending, I don't think about the westernized version of it. I think about in terms of Black people making slavery untenable because of the escapes that was happening, several hundred per year, because of people like Harriet Tubman and a whole bunch of other names that we don't know, because of the maroon colonies, because of the fortification of the abolitionist movement, because of the escaped slaves. All of those things is why slavery ended, not because white people gained the conscious. But then, moving on to the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, all of these different things have created a society that is better than it was in the past. And there are people that say we're going backwards. We're not going backwards. Things are better for us than they were for our parents. Things were better for our parents than they were for our grandparents. And you can just keep going back. So what are we going to do to make sure that our next generation has a better situation than what we have right now? So those are the things that we need to think about.
So thank you. That's definitely very helpful and also comforting. Higher education is a very complex system, and change is occurring in many areas, from the classroom to administrative offices. What angle do you think we need to focus on to address broadening participation?
Yeah, so minority serving institutions are becoming the norm. We're looking at generations of students that continue to be more diverse. Every class is more diverse than the previous class. Every new class is more diverse than the previous class. So we need to, first really start thinking about the institutions that students of color are going to, and making sure that those institutions have the resources that they need in order to be competitive. We also have to rethink what makes a school good. Why are schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, why are they good? What makes them good? Um, and why is it that we have this hierarchy in higher education? We have these rankings, and we are accepting that certain institutions are at the top of these rankings. But but we're not really critically analyzing the metrics that we're using. Why is an institution ranked higher because they reject more students? Why is rejection something that we revere? So it's questioning things like that, I think, is going to be vitally important for broadening participation, because if we continue to say, if you look at all the schools that's on the top 10 for U.S. News and World Report, I think the Pell eligibility, the average Pell eligibility is about 10%. So how can we just say that all of the best schools are schools that have the fewest poor kids? So it's a social construct. The way that we are assigning status and prestige to these schools is based on a social construct that can be reconstructed as easily as it was constructed. It's just that we've allowed people, often people who don't look like us, to create systems that favor them. So, these are some of the things that we need to do in order to create the kind of higher education environment that's going to be meaningful to the students of the future.
Thank you. So we've talked for almost an hour, believe it or not, and we have about 5 minutes before the next panel. So I wanted to give you this time to talk about anything that hasn't come up, but you wanted to leave with us, attendees, students, etc. Before our panel ends or our discussion keynote ends.
Okay, I'm gonna give a quick story in less than 5 minutes. So I was watching a docuseries on Picasso. Picasso was trained in classical European art, but art wasn't really moving him. And then he became enamored by the work of another artist named Matisse. He was so fascinated by Matisse that he became a little cynical about his own work. One time he went to an art show, Matisse was there displaying his work. Picasso put out his work, and as soon as he saw Matisse's, he packed up his and went home because he didn't want his work to be next to Matisse's. A friend of his brought him an article of a critic that was slamming Matisse's work just to help Picasso feel better. And Picasso looked at the article and said, "I want people like that to say stuff like that about my work." So instead of him thinking that, instead of it uplifting him, it actually reinforced that that Matisse was doing something right. So he finally got a chance to meet Matisse. The first thing Matisse gave him was an African sculpture. And he told Picasso, he said, "Look at this sculpture and look how they contort the images. Look how they exaggerate features. Look at how they create a vision." He said, "European artists are only doing what photographers can do better. African artists aren't painting life, they're painting our dreams." And so this inspired Picasso to completely change his style in a way that made him one of the most revered artists ever. So I think there's parallels to be made between Picasso's adaptation of African art and collective impact and collectivism. So a lot of times we'll look at other cultures and we'll think what they're doing is primitive or is not as evolved. But a lot of times, if we look deeper, it's actually on a higher level than what we're even doing. And I think the way that we can look at collective impact and this disconnect from collectivism and the perhaps reconnection of it is a way for us to take something that is good in concept and theory and really create a practice out of it that honors its origins and creates better opportunities for the young people and the communities and families that it was designed to help.
Thank you. Perfect timing and lots of wonderful information and food for thought that you've provided us today. And for the project team as they think about the work they want to do moving forward. So thank you, Dr. Toldson, and please enjoy your time in Bali on our behalf.